International development. Thank you. We are recording the session for some people who couldn't make it this evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the second in the Global Development Dialogue series that we've been running since launching our Global Development Impact Plan in the middle of the year. This dialogue tonight is entitled Food Security, Transdisciplinary Approaches over the Next Decade. As many of you will know, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organisation, FAO, is a specialised agency of the United Nations that leads international efforts to defeat hunger, improve nutrition and food security. Recently, the FAO released its report, The State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World 2021. And so our panel discussion tonight will be extremely topical and relevant as the world grapples with this incredibly critical and development challenge. Very pleased now to hand over to Rong Yu, who's going to say a few words and set the context for us for tonight, and then I'll come back and join you with the panelists. Thanks, Rong Yu.
Thank you, Dallas. Is it working? I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and their custodianship of the land on which we meet this evening. On behalf of the University of Queensland, I would like to pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connection to country. We recognise their valuable contributions to Australian and global society. This campus has always been a space for teaching, research, learning and collaborations tens of thousands of years before it was established as a university, and it continues today. It is my pleasure to welcome you to UQ this evening, and especially those online remotely, to the second event in our Global Development Dialogue series. I would like to acknowledge the many partners and colleagues who work directly with UQ on a range of global development programs and initiatives. It will not be possible to deliver this work without you, our valued partners and collaborators. A very special thank you to our panelists joining us in person and online. We're very grateful for your time and for the giving of your expertise around the extremely important global challenge of food security. This is actually very interesting that I give this remark about food security. Somebody who actually grew up living for 3 decades under a food rationing system. So I do know, what it's like, without food security and food safety, and especially without actually sufficient food to eat. I honestly actually still feel it, how difficult it was to go hungry. UQ has a long and successful history of participating in and leading international development initiatives. Our faculties, schools, institutes, and research centers have been participating in international development activities for more than 25 years. The university has committed to continuing its important work in developing through the implementation of a dedicated global development impact plan launched earlier this year by our Vice Chancellor, Professor Deborah Terry. And for your information, tomorrow, the university will be launching its new strategic plan, 2022 to 2025. And in it, there's a big component regarding international development across UQ, because one of the key objectives is for UQ to be known as the go-to institution for international development in Indo-Pacific. So that's worth celebrating, I think. The plan harnesses the full gamut of development expertise from across the UQ community to enhance the university's reputation and to achieve real, meaningful impact throughout the world. By bringing together development expertise across teaching, research, policy development, program delivery, commercial project management, and advisory services, we directly support UQ's mission of achieving global development leadership for a better world. A key initiative of the Global Development Impact Plan has been the formation of a virtual platform, the Global Development Hub. The hub is a connecting point, a community of like-minded UQ academics, researchers, development practitioners, and students across a range of disciplines, faculties, institutes, who are either engaged in or interested in global development work. The hub will be supported by academic leads across 6 key thematic areas. Agriculture, that was actually my background, a country boy, and worked for Ministry of Agriculture before I came to Australia 30 years ago from China. Energy and resources, environment, governance and public policy, health, innovations and entrepreneurship. They are thematic areas, but I think they are all interconnected, whichever way you look at it. These are broad theme areas and not exclusive in any way. This provides an ideal way for UQ to map and showcase its development capabilities and connections. We also plan for the hub to be a doorway for external stakeholders from across government, academia, industry, and NGO sectors to connect to and work with UQ on development projects initiatives. The hub will also help external stakeholders find and connect with the right development experts at UQ. In addition to the academic leads, the UQ International Development Team will also lend support to the hub with technical leadership, training, capacity building, management, and research. Tonight, we will explore the critical global issue of food security. Can't emphasize that highly enough. The world is not on track to achieve zero hunger by 2030, a key United Nations Sustainable Development Goal. If recent trends continue, the number of people affected by hunger would surpass 840 million by 2030. I think that's exactly the number of people taken out of poverty by China in the last 3 decades. With more than 250 million people potentially at the brink of starvation, swift action needs to be taken to provide food and humanitarian relief to the most at-risk regions. I look forward to discussing how we can harness UQ's broad range of global development expertise, spanning development practitioners, academics, early career researchers, students, and teaching staff. We are very fortunate to have a diverse and talented group of panelists here this evening and to contribute to this very topical and important area. We are delighted to have panelists joining us from both Australia and Indonesia. They have broad experience across agricultural science, community engagement, policy setting, and project and program delivery on the ground. I will now hand back to Dallas to introduce our panelists and to commence tonight's Global Development Dialogue. Thank you.
We're going to start the event with a video. I'm going to get you to watch a very short video. They say a picture paints 1,000 words, and I think a video might paint significantly more. So we'll get Jess to set the video going, and that will really contextualise our panel discussion for this evening.
Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, the world was not on track to end world hunger and malnutrition in all its forms by 2030. Under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, up to 161 million more people were facing hunger in 2020 than in 2019. New figures estimate that between 720 and 811 million people around the world faced hunger in 2020. The prevalence of undernourishment increased this past year to reach a level of 9.9%. Around 660 million people may still face hunger in 2030, in part due to lasting effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on global food security. This represents 30 million more people than in a scenario in which the pandemic had not occurred. More than half the world's undernourished are found in Asia. An additional 1/3 reside in Africa. Globally, 2.37 billion people did not have access to adequate food in 2020, an increase of nearly 320 million people in 1 year. Globally, malnutrition in all its forms also remains a challenge. In 2020, 149.2 million children under age 5, or 22%, were affected by stunting and 6.7% suffered from wasting. The actual figures are expected to be higher due to the effects of COVID-19. 38.9 million children of children under 5, or 5.7%, are overweight. In 2019, the high cost of healthy diets combined with income inequality caused healthy diets to be too expensive for around 3 billion people, a number expected to increase for 2020. In this environment, food systems transformations aimed at bolstering food security and nutrition are more important than ever before. Major drivers negatively affecting food security and nutrition include conflict, climate variability and extremes, and economic slowdowns and downturns. When food systems transformations focus on fostering greater resilience to these drivers, food systems can better provide affordable and healthy diets that are sustainable and inclusive. 6 transformation pathways, tailored to their specific context, will help us emerge from the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic. And such a transformation can be a powerful driving force towards ending hunger, food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms for all.
Extremely moving, extremely thought-provoking, and we have a group of fabulous people to talk us through some of the issues and some of the events that are happening to try and solve this particular issue. Can I please welcome online Professor Dr. Arizal Jamal from Indonesia. Professor Jamal is the Director for Crop Variety Protection and Agricultural Licensing in Indonesia. He manages the process of issuing plant variety protection certification and agricultural business licenses. Having held senior research roles leading teams in the areas of agricultural economics and rural development, Arizal brings his broad Indonesian expertise to our food security discussion. We also have online, sorry, I've got to flip back now. Online, we've got Mr. Rajendra Aryal. Rajendra is the representative and country director for Indonesia and Timor-Leste for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Rajendra has held senior program advisor roles for FAO, including postings in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines, Pakistan, South Sudan, Serbia and Italy, So we really look forward to some of the practical discussions and experiences that Rajendra has. Also online, a very big welcome to Mr. Ranmal Sumarawikrama. Ranmal is the manager for Asia for Caritas Australia, the international aid and development agency for the Australian Catholic Church. Ranmal's worked for Caritas for the last 15 years and has managed programs and community engagement both in Australia and offshore. Ranmal's also managed emergency response activities, many of which revolve around provision of food, and he's managed these activities globally. Currently, he's got oversight of about 25 development projects across 9 countries in Asia. So a very extensive background and experience to share with us tonight. Thank you, Ranmal. And in person, we've got Professor Ian Godwin sitting in the front row here. Ian's got more than 30 years experience in plant biotechnology research, and since 2019 has been the director of the Centre for Crop Science at QIDN. And many in the room will know that that's the Queensland Alliance for Agriculture and Food Innovation, a research institute at UQ. Ian's major focus is the improvement of crops for food, feed and other uses. He has collaborative research projects on food security and plant genetic resource conservation with Germany, Denmark, USA, China, Ethiopia and Pacific Island countries. And last but certainly not least, in person also we have Associate Professor Elske van der Vleet. Elska is the Director of the Centre for Communication and Social Change within UQ's Humanities and Social Sciences faculty. She's also the convener of the Communication for Social Change plan within the Masters of Communication program. Before joining UQ, Elska worked for 2 decades in research, development and teaching positions in Indonesia, Vietnam and Sri Lanka, and has worked across multiple other countries, including China, Kenya, Uganda, the Philippines, Kyrgyzstan, etc. So Elska has a broad breadth of experience from many different perspectives, and certainly to share with us the idea of community engagement around the food security challenge that we're all interested in tonight. Elska's integrated her research and her work to bring a transdisciplinary approach to projects, and particularly a focus on sustainable rural development. Her most recent projects have been in Indonesia, Timor-Leste, the Philippines and Mongolia. So very big welcome. I might ask our 2 in-person people to come and join us up at the chairs here. And our online guests, I wish you could be here in person one day soon. We're all hoping, but we've got cameras going everywhere and we'll do our best to navigate. Thank you. So Rajendra, if I can turn to you first, I'm going to ask you a question which I hope will allow you to share some of your background and some of your insights. The global pandemic is just another challenge on top of conflicts, climate variability and extremes, economic downturns, inequality, and much more, which combine to negatively affect food security and nutrition. Given these intersecting factors, could you please outline the priority focal points for FAO generally, and in particular in Indonesia and Timor-Leste, where you have current responsibilities? We'd like to hear how you're seeing that alleviate some of the challenges and achieve progress.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening. Dallas, thanks a lot, and thanks to the University of Queensland for giving me this opportunity. Definitely, the global pandemic has put an additional layer of challenge at present in the world, not only in the region. And with still significant levels of rural poverty, malnutrition, and rapid urbanization, the challenge for us now is to make agriculture, fisheries, and forestry more profitable, while also making them more resilient and sustainable to the effects of climate change to feed the future generations. So this region in particular where I'm working, there are places which are facing poverty, food insecurity, and malnutrition. And the results of the impact of climate change is often experienced in form of drought, floods, and others. So FAO in both countries has put increased resilience of livelihoods to the effects of climate change, recurrent disasters, and emerging pandemic threats as its topmost priority in the country program framework. And this strategic framework seeks to support the 2030 agenda through the transformation of more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems for 4 betters: better production, better nutrition, a better environment, and a better life, and leaving no one behind, for sure. So these 4 betters actually reflect the interconnected economic, social, and environmental dimensions of agri-food systems. They also encourage a strategic and systems-oriented approach within all of FAO's interventions. And there are other 4 cross-cutting accelerators as well, namely the technology, innovation, data, and complements. What I mean by complements are governance, human capital, and institutions in all of its programmatic interventions to accelerate the impact while minimizing the trade-offs. So Indonesia, on top of other challenges, it has also been identified as one of the potential hotspots for zoonosis and the new emerging infectious diseases in the region. So the Global Health Security Program that has been launched in Indonesia last year in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, and FAO is working closely with the Ministries of Agriculture, Health, the Environment, and Forestry to reduce the risk of infectious diseases in agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, impacting on humans following the One Health approach. On the climate change front, FAO is prioritizing support to smallholder farming communities in combating the effects of climate change, reducing disaster risk, and enabling the recovery of livelihoods. This involves the capacity development of farmers in improved agriculture practices, ensuring better integration into the value chain, conservation agriculture, and coordination with government at different levels. Another important activity that you are all aware of that we also carried out together with both the governments of Indonesia and Timor-Leste was the technical support provided to the subnational and national dialogues for the preparation of this UN Food System Summit dialogue, which happened this year. Both countries have developed the national pathways presented in this FSSD dialogues, and I'm happy to share that we are currently working together with the government of Indonesia on developing a deeper, more comprehensive and scientific study to analyze the food system and promote integrated planning and coordination at national and subnational levels. You made that it was also presented in the video, the food systems transformation tool for understanding and monitoring food system performance, identifying the main constraints and trade-offs, and to develop a pathway for change is currently being developed together. At the same time, we are also working with the Ministry of Agriculture to make agri-food systems more resilient to shocks and stresses. And actually, we are looking at 4 different indicators, which were also presented in this SOFA 2021 report, which was released a couple of weeks back. Another important work that we are doing with Indonesia is that we have recently signed an MOU on South-South and triangular cooperation. We are currently defining the work plan, and we hope to also use Indonesia's good practices to other countries in the world, as well as bring some good practices from other South-South regions. And finally, as you are all aware of, Indonesia has assumed the G20 presidency for 2022. And the Ministry of Agriculture is leading the G20 Agriculture Working Group. We have Irizal today. He can talk more about that if time permits. We are working closely together in the food security and agriculture sector, and 3 priorities have been identified, namely building a resilient and sustainable food systems and agriculture, open, predictable, and transparent agriculture trade, and innovative agri-entrepreneurship through digital agriculture. In this context, in the Indonesian Sherpas and FAO Sherpas will be working closely in 2022 on these 3 priorities. Thank you very much, Dallas. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Rajendra. What a brilliant example of all of the intersecting components and parts. I'm going to turn to Ranmal now. And Ranmal, given that you've got so many projects—
Sorry, Dallas, I can't hear you. Do you have the mic with you?
Might help if I turn my microphone on. Sorry, Ranmal, microphone. It was a rookie error, wasn't it? So I was just going to say, given that you've got so many projects on the go in so many different countries, what are some of the key challenges you've found on the ground that have escalated given the global pandemic that we've had, and that you think will continue for many years to come with respect to food security? And what things are being seen to be most impactful in the projects you're delivering?
Thanks so much, Dallas. It was very fascinating to hear Rajendra and kind of what happens in the big picture at the kind of national level. Caritas Australia, as Dallas mentioned, you know, we're kind of an NGO, a part of the Caritas Internationalis network, and we work at a very, very different end of the spectrum. We work basically in very, very vulnerable communities at the village and the family level. So for us, food security is essentially, you know, what a family goes through, you know, over the course of the year. So the challenges that happens at the macro level, climate change, socio-political conflict, etc., you know, has quite a significant impact at the family level, at the home level, at you know, in the village. And one of the key challenges that we face is that the variability in every village, you know, will be different from one village to another. And you know, within the village, what the location is will also impact food security for a family. So for us at the program delivery level, it's a challenge of aligning all the different factors that affect food security. So for a family in Timor-Leste or Indonesia or Bangladesh, for example, you know, you've got weather-related factors, you've got, you know, soil-related factors, you've got the kind of social context around the family that can affect access to the farm, access to the vegetable garden that the family tends to. conflict might be a factor that would kind of impact food security. Myanmar at the moment now, as you know, with the military coup, there's a lot of kind of fighting happening along the borders, and people are afraid to kind of visit their kind of vegetable gardens to do their farming. So there's a lot of factors that are in play. And one of the challenges that we face and our partners face on the ground is aligning all those factors and getting the results, kind of sufficient food, at the end of the season, really, to last them a year. Of course, the big thing that every community is facing now, and it's really becoming more serious, is climate change. It's something in a lot of the communities that we work in. Climate change is not about temperature. It's not about kind of season. It's all about hunger. And for them, the only kind of real impact of the only thing that they see really of climate change is hunger. And that's a huge challenge that we face, because seasons are no longer kind of predictable. Weather events are more frequent, and the intensity is greater. All the traditional indigenous knowledge that communities have, that's passed down generation to generation, that ensures that they can use the environment around them and the seasons around them to produce crops that would get them through the year. All that has changed, and that's something. It's changing so fast that communities are left behind, and they kind of thrown. All that indigenous knowledge no longer applies, and that's a huge thing that we are working on. And it's not an easy challenge. The other thing is, for us, food security is not just agriculture. It sometimes for some communities, there's just not enough water. There's just not enough kind of fertile soil to get enough out of the ground in terms of crops. So we've got to work with these communities, and don't forget, a lot of them are already very, very vulnerable. A lot of them are from ethnic minorities or tribal communities. So they're already outside the mainstream kind of network, which would give them access to knowledge, access to the latest agricultural techniques, etc. So working with these communities is quite key for us, and it continues to be a great challenge.
Thanks so much, Ranmal. I'm going to swing over to Ian now in person and go to the Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which has the objective of ensuring access to safe, nutritious and sufficient food for all people all year round. How has it and how will crop science research support progress to achievement of this objective, and where are you seeing the greatest opportunities to have impact in this area?
I've got a bit of a bias.
That's all right, you can declare that.
Because I'm a geneticist, and whatever the question, the answer is always genetics. But no, realistically, over the last 50 years, the gains in productivity in agriculture have been about 50% genetics and about 50% improved management, etc. And that's probably not going to change. But as we need to have more and more food production, particularly with climate change, particularly in the tropics, the whole issue of being able to produce genetic gain more quickly, and we have the tools to do that. So there's all sorts of new plant breeding technologies. There's all sorts of digital technologies, which of course Australian farmers, for example, are starting to embrace. A subsistence farmer in sub-Saharan Africa is not going to embrace digital technologies, but their use of digital technologies is actually going to be in the seed that they get. So one of the most wonderful things that I think is a way to give technology to some of the world's most resource-poor farmers is to give them improved genetics, improved seeds, which means they don't actually have to change what they're doing, but if they can increase their productivity by 10, 20%, that's a wonderful thing. Now, I'm talking about productivity, but I think there's a problem that we can tend to ignore there. Food security isn't the main game for a lot of parts of the world. It's actually nutritional security. And most of the world's poorest people get most of their calories from 3 cereals: wheat, rice, and corn. And actually, 50% of the world's calorific intake is from those 3 species. Now, that's not because people are stupid. It's because there's a biophysical reason for that. From an energetics point of view, from a plant, the best way to store energy is in starch. And we humans have evolved in such a way that starch is a major part of where we get our calories from. So that's not going to change. We're going to continue to use starchy crops as the main food security. But the problem is that that leads to all sorts of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, etc. So that's something that we know with genetic technologies, for example, we can deliver those types of things. We're not needing to do some engineering post-farm gate. We can actually deliver better nutritional quality on farm. So that's my little blurb about why crop science is going to be to the rescue. But I do want to say something that my brain cannot get itself around, because I think like a geneticist. So the average Australian family who lives on a farm and makes a living out of the farm will have 500 to 1,000 hectares. So there's 570 million farmers around the world. 83% of them have 2 hectares or less. When you've got 2 hectares and you're trying to feed a family, you're not going to take risks. You're not going to plant a new crop that you've never planted before. It's highly unlikely. Australian farmers can do that. You can say, okay, we'll set aside 10% of our land and we'll try something different this year. You're not going to do that if you live in Ethiopia, because if it doesn't work, you could well be doomed. So I actually feel that until we have a means of reforming the way in which land is held in most countries around the world, we're not going to get close to food security. And I would say we're dooming people to subsistence agriculture. And the whole point of subsistence agriculture is to try and get out of subsistence agriculture.
Thanks so much, Ian. That was very thought-provoking. And yes, you can understand why people guard their 2 hectares of land and the crops that they grow for some form of surety around what they're going to produce. Can I go back to one of our online panellists? Dr. Arizel, if you're there, it would be fantastic to hear from you some of the specific initiatives and investments you're seeing within the Indonesian agricultural sector and where you might like to see increased focus over the coming decade. I imagine many of the farmers that you deal with in your work are on these small holdings. And so some of the challenges that Ian just mentioned will be important in your work.
Okay, thank you, Dallas. Good afternoon and good evening for everybody. Thank you for Rajendra already give brief information about some initiative by our government in Indonesia, working together with FAO. In general, I think global pandemic and climate variability and extreme and also economic downturn have impact on agriculture development in Indonesia in the last 2 years, especially 2020 and 2021. But in macro level, the position of agriculture development, I think in the last 2 years, we call it is still on the track for the Indonesian case. First, the agriculture contribution to Indonesian economic growth still positive. In 2020, agriculture economic growth 1.75 compared with Indonesian economic growth minus 2.07. And the good condition, secondly, about the export value of Indonesia. In 2020, our value of Indonesian agriculture export increased around 15.79%. This is the good condition in the pandemic condition. But in micro level, we found that some problem with the malnutrition and other, but we don't have exactly data about that. But we saw that there's some problem related with the price of agricultural product and also for the farmer income due to the problem of distribution and value chain, and also for the decrease of people purchasing power. There are some specific initiative and also investment in Indonesia agriculture sector in the last 2 years. In short time, our government maintaining the price of at farmer level according with to government purchasing price and also for the reference price. Another initiative is to strengthen food reserve of the central and also for the local government, and promoting agriculture e-commerce and attract more young people to work in agriculture in pandemic era. In the same time, there are another initiatives that to increase the production capacity of agriculture in Indonesia in a sustainable manner, and we use that food estate approach in some area like in central Kalimantan for the rice, and in North Sumatra for the vegetable, for the East Sumatra for the rice also, and East Nusa Tenggara for the rice. Besides that, we rising of export agriculture product volume, and also encourage to increase the variety of export commodity. As you know that Indonesia has a lot of diversity in genetic research. For the next decade, there are 2 issues that need to accommodate through agriculture development in my mind. The first, Indonesia related to the effort to strengthen our food security and also for the problem of nutrition. First, we need to have a special effort about the farmer welfare, and secondly, with the effort to maximize a local initiative and a local champion in Indonesia. As you know that Indonesia with the diverse agricultural resource potential has the opportunity to improve food security as well as issue related with the nutrition through the development of local champion in some place as a food source, I think. So that the agriculture development program and policy in the future need to support the presence of the local champion. This is in my mind for the next decade. Regarding with the issue of farmer welfare, effort to increase the food production to support the food security and also for the nutrition problem must be in line with the effort to improve the farmer welfare. This is the one issue we need to see in the next 10 years. I think one of the issue in this matter, in line with the question in some policymaker in our minister, how to increase the average land ownership of the farmer. This is the big issue in Indonesia. As you know that more than 50% of our farmer they own the land ownership under 0.5 hectare. You can imagine that. This is two issues that we need to give special effort for the next decade. First, related about the local champion, because we have to reach with resource, and secondly, related with the issue of farmer rice, farmer welfare, then in line with the land ownership of the farmer. I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arizal. Very, very interesting to hear from the policy side of things, or the policy perspective. So we've seen lots of intersecting parts. Elska, I'm going to come to you now and talk about the transdisciplinary aspects of our topic tonight, and how you might suggest we weave those things together. Traditionally, we've worked in silos, and I think we've all commented on that there's very much siloed approaches to this, but keen to hear how we might break away from that and achieve some really sustainable impact with respect to food security.
Thanks, Dallas. Yes, and I'd like to underline that complexity first, what it means in terms of food security. Of course, there's, and I think the video showed that very clearly, and some of you have addressed that as well. And of course, first there's a level of food production, and Ian particularly talked about it, that, you know, science can do a lot in increasing food production, but I can think of, you know, 1,000 reasons why farmers in Eastern Indonesia would not adopt a certain, you know, a new seed, you know, when it implies their land use, their labor use, you know, they may not be able to afford it, maybe may not be able to even access seeds anywhere nearby. So there are a lot of those social and market aspects to it. Of course, there's also the relation with the use of sustainable use of the natural resources in food production. There's the food safety issues, you know, to produce safe food, you know, free of pesticides or other chemicals or other contamination. And I think the other elements that often we don't think about is, you know, food security is not only about production, it's also about, because we produce a lot of food, you know, there's a lot of actually publications that show that there is enough food. So it is about how can we make sure there's less waste of food, both in production and consumption. And that, of course, then involves, you know, how we treat value chain, how we deal with consumer behaviors. And then, of course, there's the whole idea of access to nutritious food, which was very clearly touched on by the FAO video as well, affordable food, and food even to be available and being fairly distributed. So how can all the food that we are produce actually reach the people who don't have enough of it? So, and of course, if we are at a university, the thing we think about is, you know, we are a research institution. So one of the roles that universities is doing the research, and particularly in this case, intervening in this or supporting this area is research for development. And of course, research initiatives are determined by individuals, institutions, and also funding agencies. And I think very often what we see is that a research initiative emerges because an individual is passionate about their work. You know, they want to do something new, they want to use their knowledge, and they start a project and they see a funding opportunity. But very often that is still defined from their disciplinary thinking. And when the funding bodies, actually their requirements want people to be, you know, they want them to be everything these days. You have to be participatory, you have to be, you know, think about sustainability, you have to do this, you have to, you know, involve a gender specialist. But what I've experienced is very often, you know, those other requirements are tag-ons to the initiative. So the initiative is developed by somebody who thinks from their kind of passionate way of looking at the world and their science, and the rest is included just to get the money. And I don't think that is the way we can really solve problems, you know, complex problems and really look at all those elements, you know, all those levels that I just mentioned in terms of food security. There could be at least 30 different disciplines involved in tackling that. And even a workable team, you know, can never do all of that. So how do we then work really more in a transdisciplinary approach? What I have found is very important. And just for information for those who don't know, I come from a science background, and actually, you know, not deserted. I walked over to social sciences, so I kind of understand very much the, you know, those different ways of looking at the world and the role of our academic or contributions to these big issues. And they're sometimes very difficult to combine. So if we look at some definitions of transdisciplinarity, and the one that I think, a very simple one that I think is important to look at here, is that transdisciplinary is about integration at the interface of scientific questions and societal problems. And I think that is different from only just transcending across disciplinary boundaries, because we really start from the societal problems and the partners, you know, who you know, the development partners, the policy partners, and particularly the community partners. And that has a lot of implications if we want to play in that field about how we formulate it. And I think what's most important is that we start an initiative not from just one disciplinary perspective and add the rest on, but actually first come to a common vision and understanding of what that societal problem is, and how our different ways of looking at it and the different disciplines actually relate to it or deal with it or struggle with it. And only when we are at the same wavelength, then we can actually start to think about, about what can we then do together? How can we transcend those disciplinary boundaries? How can we adjust our methodologies in a way that they already anticipate, the alignment rather than making it work at the end? And I think that's extremely important, because we will be losing a lot of time, and we have lost a lot of time in the past by actually just, hoping that it will happen, after the research is handed over to development partners, and often it wouldn't, because those elements have not been connected. So then coming back to how we do that, I want to come back to those individuals, institutions, and funding agencies, because I think they all have to change. Like, individuals, of course, need to be able to of course, you still need your disciplinary expertise, and you still need to be passionate about what you're doing, but you have to be willing to actually work with others and work out that visioning first, and actually making sure that you both understand that you look at the world in different ways, and what your actual areas of overlap are, where you can meet, rather than only where you can add on. And that would require some skills. So, or process of facilitation, or maybe even development. And of course, we've all been trained in very different disciplinary ways. And so another role that universities can actually do is start training our students in a way that when they graduate, they have a better understanding of what it means that they go out in the world with a certain disciplinary expertise, but can cope with complex problems. And I'm actually pleased to tell you that we are launching a course next year that's called Complexity, Action, and Sustainable Futures, that will be open for all students across all programs at UQ, where actually they will be taken through, understanding the crisis and then the SDGs and what the skills that are needed to be able to to go out and contribute to these things. But then also the institutions need to change, because at the moment we do things in very disciplinary ways, because that's how our performance is evaluated by our institutions. We still have to, to do the very kind of high quality journals, which are very disciplinary, and if you are working in that field of research for development, you just, it's not ticked off as being of the same value. So I see it's a little bit changing in UQ, but I don't think it's changing enough. So there has to be that kind of both that reward system for both your academic performances, but also for the impact in the world that you have. And then the third, the funding agencies, of course, they need to change, and some have changed already as well, so that they allow for they have funding schemes that allow for these more transdisciplinary approaches, because there's still very much, particularly, for instance, we look at those that fund agriculture research, ACR, their portfolios are still sectoral. They don't look at systems or, and it's very difficult to still go across different research program areas. So, and they also need to change their indicators for success. It is still very much about eventually the economic indicators, rather than also, the way how we did things and how things will continue after a particular project is funded. So for that, we really need dialogue at all those levels to transform the ways we work and how we are being evaluated. And I really hope that the Global Development Hub can be one of those places where that dialogue can take place, and that kind of, visioning together from where we can design initiatives before we actually jump into a funding opportunity. Thank you.
That sounds very exciting, and I think it's the objective of all. Oh, Mike, sorry. Gosh, I'm not going to get used
to this at all. They're going to sack me soon. Yeah, look, I think that's the whole reason why we've gone down the path of developing the hub as the core initiative in the plan, and it's to try and bring people together to help design those initiatives. And it's something we're very passionate about in the development team, is having that, rather than be reacting, to tender opportunities or public calls for proposals. We can actually start developing up really well-designed things. Can I just quickly throw to the audience for some questions? We're running on time or a little bit behind time, But Rach has got a roving mic here, and I think, Jess, have you got another one? Or yeah. So if there's any questions at all from the audience, very keen to have you address them to the member of the panel that you'd like to answer it.
Okay, Gunnar Kirchhoff. Now, Ian said that 50% is genetics. As a soil scientist, I would say the other 50% is soils. But I have to be
is important, right?
yeah. No, but I have to be a little bit careful. But I like to ask a real provocative question, and probably Elsk is maybe the best one to answer that. How important is agriculture when we are talking about food security? I mean, we are producing a lot of food. There is in-crop losses, post-harvest losses. There is an astronomical amount of food wastage. And the numbers that I've got in my head is that about 50% of the food is lost. So how important is agriculture? Even in Ethiopia, where people are talking about these massive famines, but one part of the country, people suffer from hunger and they die. Another part of the country, they've got heaps of food. So my question is, well, is it right to emphasize on agriculture, or do we have to emphasize on something else? And I still want to keep my job as a soil scientist.
Well, I think I've partly addressed it by pointing out those, those other areas of wastage, of access, and of, distribution and things like that. So I think what we read in reports depends on where that report comes from. And a lot of the narratives are still very much dominated by the big agriculture industries. They, of course, want to hear that it is, a lot is about technologies, and that's where the money is. So unfortunately, those that promote more like food sovereign systems, or that promote, more, ways for more equal distribution, they go upstream, or against the stream, actually, very often. So it is, I fully agree with you, Gunnar. I don't have a number, how important is it, but I think all those other areas do need to have that access. And it is recognized by, by FAO, by all the other agencies. Only the point is that, where actually funding goes to promote an activity, you still see that's very much dominated, I think, by the by the agenda of big companies, and they still want to sell the seeds. So, yeah.
If I could say something to Gunnar about that as well. I mean, Ethiopia is a case in point, and again, Ethiopia is one of those places where the average farmer has got a hectare, and there's lots of them, and they don't have land tenure. So, which means that there's not a lot of benefit in improving your farm, and I'm talking about things like soils, if at a whim a politician or someone like that can come and take it off you, and that does happen from time to time. So you don't have any land tenure, and you're not allowed to buy the farm next door if you think that the farm next door isn't being well managed, which is what happens in, I suppose, many other countries. You can do that, and that does give you efficiencies. The other thing about Ethiopia, and if you've been there, you'll know that there's a lot of rivers and they get a lot of floods, and bridges are always being washed away. So the ability to transport things around the country is pretty poor now. And compared to Australia, where we've got the logistics to move hay from Victoria up to the northwest of the Pilbara, if we need to, we can do that. Whereas in Ethiopia, you can't move these things around. So it's not an agricultural issue at all in that case. It's actually something about logistics and infrastructure.
Can I just add just a bit of an anecdote?
Rajendra, or Ranmal?
Yes, Ranmal.
Ranmal.
Yeah, just a bit of an anecdote that it's also about timing. I was working in a kind of village in Cambodia, in Kampong Thom, and there was a fisheries and a livestock program. And there was this farmer who we knew that there were floods, the unseasonal rains were going to start, and that particular area was flood prone. And there was one farmer who just decided to sell everything. So got rid of all her livestock and sold everything, and 2 weeks later, that whole village was underwater. Now, all the fisheries, the crops, everything was destroyed, but this one farmer, because of timing, managed to sell everything prior and had cash in hand, to get through, and so that kind of issues are kind of really practical at that level. That sometimes it's just having the foresight, cash in hand is also food security. So just thought I'd share that.
And again, development on the ground or projects on the ground, we hear these different perspectives and different stories. Rajendra, did you want to make any comment on that last question about, is it really about agriculture or is it about other things?
Exactly. No, this is a very good question. Actually, if you go back to the video about the SOFI report, it talks about the agri-food system. It's not only production. What we mean by agri-food system is like, production, transportation, storage, processing, distribution, consumption, and even food loss and waste. So it's the whole chain that we have to look at. And this is the need of the time. And so we should not look only at at one element of production, but holistically. And this is first point. Second point, I mentioned about the 4 indicators. Actually, when we talk about the 4 indicators, which is actually very clearly highlighted by the SOFA report, which was released 2 weeks back. And this is where we are working very closely with Indonesia. The first indicator talks about production. Yes, that is one element. The second indicator looks at availability. And the third indicator looks at physical access. And the fourth indicator looks at economic access. So if you look at a country like Indonesia, where you have it's a huge archipelago. You have geographic, distribution or geographic access is very, very challenging. I give you an example. I was in NTT 2 weeks back, Nusa Tenggara Timur, and where the farmers practice slash and burn type of agriculture. So as FAO and Ministry of Agriculture, we introduced conservation agriculture, and that has really helped them produce more food. So I went in November and I realized that the food stock they have at this point of time had never happened before. Thanks to the conservation agriculture, they could produce more corn. But there is no storage. The post-harvest losses are so high. So it's not only a matter of production. Now we have to make somehow, arrangement that these farmers, they could have better storage facilities to store the food. Plus, they could also store the seed properly. So we have to look actually through the whole. Through the lens of agri-food system. Thank you. Over to you, Dallas.
Thank you very much, Rajendra. Are there any other questions from the audience? Because I think we're right on time.
Sorry, it's kind of a follow-on. I felt that the problem is probably public policies and economics. It's less about whether you have a better seed, and until and unless it is being used. So all these development institutions, do they work with public policies? Do they actually work with World Economic Forum kind of organizations, or say World Bank, to fund projects which will be linked with infrastructure if they want agricultural change? For land allotment change, does the public policies departments are influenced politically? Is there anything internationally can be done like this way? I can relate it to a very recent incident in India. They wanted to change the land allotment. They wanted to take smaller sizes of the land and allow bigger corporates to bring in bigger land. Reason was using seeds which are more technologically advanced and will be able to give better crop, but it just politically got shut down. It was like 1 year protest, people died. So is it all development institutions are looking in something else, and where they should be solving the problems institutionally first?
Would you like Like to perhaps address how your public policy initiatives are addressing that type of issue where projects are very short term and funded in the short term and not really addressing the systemic issues?
Hello.
We can hear you.
Yes, for me. Okay. I think we in Indonesia, based on our experience, we try to, for the systematic solve of the problem of the some related with the field problem of the farmer, and we working together with some like of FAO and other World Bank and others, and we try to formulate a systematic way to solve the problem and to make it sustain. I think this is in some experience with our agriculture development industry. I think in policy initiative for the some problem, we always try to working together with some with many people and try to solve the problem with sustained manners.
Thank you, Rizal. Elska, I might throw to you because I think it wraps up nicely what you were talking about the change in funding models. And
yeah, well, I actually keep following on the example of Indonesia. You know, I've worked a lot in Indonesia with Pak Rizal actually, and you know what part of the problem in Indonesia is as well that a lot of the funding is just 1 year, and by the time actually the funds are in the bank account of the institution, it's already 5 months late, and there's very little work to do. I mean, and there's a reason that that system is there, and but eventually, hopefully, that will change. I know Indonesia is going through a big reorganization of the whole National Research Institute, so I'm not sure, Pak Rizal, if there's going to be any new funding rules with BRIN, you know, in the future, but that would, because that's extremely important, you know, how the agendas go out. I also know from, I mean, it's good as national policies, but it's such a diverse country. And, you know, I know from some people in some provinces that they struggle with meeting the criteria of the central level because they have different requirements. I mean, you look at West Java, close to Jakarta, situation is so different from NTT, you know, in the east, where you really have a lot of farmers that are mainly subsistence and still go hungry. So it is, there's some possibility, but it's still very difficult to get general policy. So I really hope that the reorganization of the research institution in Indonesia actually will also bring about some of those changes, that there will be longer term and more local planning. So, because I think that's going to be extremely important, and that those agendas can be developed from the local needs and the local capacities that are there, and deal with diversity. So, and I think the same holds for any country, you know, for Australia as well. And we see that very often, and I think that relates to your question, that a lot of initiatives are projects, and projects are really great. They can be fantastic, but because we're not required to report on why a project was successful, only what was successful, we don't learn enough from it. And we really need to document processes of those successes and failures better, to actually learn and institutionalize those approaches that do work, and build the capacity to continue that, rather than just go on with the next project and a new idea and a new funding scheme with new indicators. So that's really where I think, where I hope that things eventually will change, if we push that sustainability and equitability agenda hard enough and say, hey, this is what is needed. Continuity is needed in those processes and those approaches, and building that capacity to actually make a serious effort to all of that.
Thank you, Elska. I'm going to draw the evening to a close. Thank you so much to our panelists online. I think we managed the technical process there, and it was just fabulous to have you involved this evening. There is so much work to do. Thank you to you, Ian and Elska, joining us in person. And I think between us all, we really are committed to collaborating. It's finding the right projects or the right activities that we want to do, and being able to secure the most appropriate funders and supporters to take us through to some really very positive impact and outcomes. For our panelists online, please keep an eye out. We're going to send you a small token of our appreciation. We're very grateful for your time and your participation. And so we really hope that you'll accept that gift from us at the University of Queensland. We wish you could be here now to enjoy some socialising and networking and some refreshments. Hopefully very soon we will have you here in person. But for now, we'll close the event off. Thank you everyone for attending, and please stay around to meet some of your colleagues and guests so that we can build that collaborative network. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.